Okay, welcome to the FileMaker Pro user group, Dallas, Texas. This is Taylor Sharp, and we're glad to have everybody here today. We're going to do our monthly user group meeting, and today we've got Steve Doc Willis, which you should be able to see up on your screen. Is going to give us a presentation from Arizona, so we're glad to have him in here. He's with Harmonic Data, and we're of course meeting in Harmonic Data offices, but we're meeting in the Dallas offices, not Arizona. Anyway, I'm Taylor Sharp, and Greg Price and I are the chapter co-coordinators. And so we're glad to have everybody here. I don't know that there are any real big announcements other than FileMaker 19.6 is now out. So if you're ready to jump on the bleeding edge of technology, get ready to do your upgrades. Or if nothing else, do it on your beta development servers this weekend and test it out to see that it's working right. But it seems to have some interesting new technologies, including being able to roll multiple commitments together across various tables together. Anyway, well, there are a number
transactions.
of
Holy cow, that's huge.
Yeah. So it will make us look at how we get some things done and basically see if things actually all survive a commit before. And if we don't, then nothing goes through. And sometimes there's going to be some power to being able to control that. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. So life will be interesting. Still haven't heard anything about Engage next year, even though we've been rumbling and asking questions in the community forum. So who knows if we'll have a developer conference next year, but hopefully so. I really hopefully so. Anyway, been missing that for a while. So. But without further ado, let's get on to our main meeting here. So Doc, if you'll give us a presentation and tell us a little bit about yourself and take over.
Okay. I accidentally clicked and advanced my presentation by one slide, so let me back up. Okay, because my intro was in the first slide. Duh. Okay. Good morning. My name is Steve Willis, and I'm the business process expert at Harmonic Data. Don't be too impressed by my job title. Expert in Harmonic speak simply means old engineer. And as the oldest employee here, that makes me ultra qualified to hold that title. So my credentials on this topic. I have been working with computers for just over 40 years. My experience includes programming, system analysis, performance measurement, capacity planning, system administration, database design and administration, IT management, graphic design, and full stack web development using either FileMaker or MySQL as the database layer, sometimes both. Regarding FileMaker specifically, I wrote my first major app in version 5. After a several-year hiatus, I resumed FileMaker development using version 7, and I have developed in or migrated through every version since. I've also developed several websites using the problematic and rapidly fading into history FileMaker API for PHP. And despite all that experience, I am not Clara certified because it wasn't required by my previous job. So just a bit of housekeeping. There will be a Q&A period at the end where we can discuss any aspect of what I've covered. So please hold your questions until then. So where did this presentation come from? It certainly wasn't the result of some academic exercise with a disconnect from the real world. This was developed over a period of 12 years simply to maintain my own sanity. I'm the ADD poster child, and standards are what keeps my sanity intact. In my previous employer, not counting FileMaker, I was literally had written and maintained over 1 million lines of code. So this was survival mode. So the foundation of this entire, the foundational premise of this entire presentation is this: maintenance programming sucks. And I don't know of anybody I've ever met in the computer industry that disagrees with that statement. So our challenge is, when we approach any body of code, we have some questions to answer. What was the original developer trying to accomplish? What business problem was trying to be solved? How did they do it? Why did they do it that way? Who's changed it since and why? And how do we fix or enhance it without breaking it ourselves? So the bottom line to all that is, what was that person thinking when they wrote this mess? Sometimes that's us we're talking about. So the problem is, each of us brings our, excuse the Monty Pythonism, our own peculiar idiom to writing apps. We have a worldview. How do we perceive reality and the world around us in general? And then we have a problem-solving style. How do we go about solving problems? What's our approach? Our mindset is how we take that style of problem solving and apply that to programming and solving problems with computer code. And then finally, we have an approach. So how do we work within an environment's limitations, in this case, FileMaker Pro, to get all that other stuff done? So summing that up is, some poor schmuck has to dive into a body of code months, even years after it was first written to maintain it. I literally had code at my previous employer that I had not seen and had not touched in over 5 years. And it's just impossible to remember all that stuff. And typically that poor schmuck is ourselves. It's not always the person down the road that is the victim of needing to cope with all this. So why should we have standards? The first reason is it creates a manual of style for programming practice. It ensures that everybody is singing off the same page of the hymnal on how things are done. So it allows all of us to know what to expect when we're trying to maintain somebody else's work or even our own. It permits company management to communicate their performance expectations to developers tangibly and enforceably. And finally, it provides one, not the, but one objective measure of evaluating developer performance. So standards for what? First is how things are named, how they're visually organized and formatted, how they're written, and where things and how things are commented, iconography, and UI design. And let me disclaim at this point, UI design this is the only mention right here, because this is way too deep a subject to deal with in anything other than a dedicated presentation or a series of presentations. So what are the benefits of standards? It leverages widely accepted, psychological principles. And that results in greater maintenance efficiency, which means less time and effort required to assess a situation so that we can make changes. It reduces our frustration, and it lowers frequency of mistakes through a principle called anti-bugging. Anti-bugging is a concept that was coined back in the day in a book called The Psychology of Computer Programming. Still in print. I think it's in its 30th year or something like that. But anti-bugging is the concept of writing code in such a way that bugs are precluded just by the way the code's written.
Glenn, bad time. Can I call you back?
Yes, we hear you.
So what are the benefits of standards? Less transmission errors among development staff. Developers come and go, subject matter experts come and go, and you've all played the game of 20 people in a row, the telephone game. Somebody whispers something in the first person's ear, and it gets whispered from ear to ear to the 20th person, and the 20th person's what they heard is nothing like what was originally whispered. And that's the same kind of problem on steroids in a development staff that has some volatility to it. You have people coming and going, and it's like measuring and cutting off of something you've just measured and cut rather than off the original. Iconography. This is the only time we're going to mention this because this is, again, too deep a topic to delve into without a dedicated presentation. But we have some problems when you try to integrate icons outside or outside icons into FileMaker's default set, which is, I think, needlessly limited, but that's my opinion. The problem is that FileMaker's SVG code for icons, of course, is not the same flavor of SVG generated by Illustrator and other tools and those available from icon libraries. Ooh. So as a result, this causes sizing and styling issues when developing FileMaker themes and related UI standards. So my closing recommendation is use either the native icons or externals, but never both. And that is it for iconography. So let's talk about internal documentation, which is crucial to standards. In the managed database fields list for each table, every comment for every field should have a description in it. The same for the table description in the tables list. There should be something describing what it's doing. Every script should have a descriptive paragraph at the top, and that should include what the script does, any non-obvious techniques used and why they were used, and a list of the developers' names who have modified it and the dates they made those changes. That's just the basic. As far as documenting bug fixes, each bug fix should have script level comments, preferably inline if you are dealing with a formula where you can put a / and describe what's supposed to be going on in that line or in the script in that line. And it should include who made the fix and the date it was made. And if you use a trouble ticket system like Mantis, UTrack, or Zendesk or whatever, include the ticket ID. And then the ticket contains what was fixed, how it was fixed, and who fixed it. And if no such system is in place, then the comment block should include that other information. So what are the psychology behind standards? Well, I talked about psychological principles, and now we're going to explore those in a bit of depth. The first is that standards minimize Vim, and Vim has to do with cognitive loading. And so the visual load, it reduces needless inconsistency and clutter. The whole goal of, and I'm probably getting ahead of my slide where I mentioned it earlier, or later, excuse me, is we have a haystack, and what we're trying to do is subdivide the haystack into pin cushions so that it's a lot faster to find our needles, and reducing inconsistency and clutter facilitates that. Intellectual load, reducing needless complexity. If it simple is better. And then we have memory load. How much memory information, how much information do I have to keep in my head to function? And as I mentioned earlier, when you have thousands lines of code or multiple apps or whatever, you can't remember all that stuff. There's just no way. And finally, motor load. And that reduces inconsistencies in how we're supposed to behave. And a good example of this is a door we have to one of our spaces at the office. And it is a push one direction and pull the same, pull the other, but yet it's got a pull handle on both sides. And so unless you know the door, you don't know whether you're supposed to push or pull until you try it, because the visual clue isn't there to help you figure out what you're supposed to be doing. So let's look at the psychology behind standards further. We'll deal with the hierarchy of needs here. The first is the code needs to be understandable. And the reason for that is it allows us to grasp the flow of control and data more readily. It has to be discoverable. We need to be able to easily detect where the problems are. And simple, back to reduce distraction. We don't have a bunch of distractions caused by unrelated issues. Preventative, we're back to anti-bugging again and lowering the chance of creating new and improved bugs. And productive, it reduces our time and effort wasted. And that leads to a greater degree of job satisfaction and staff retention. So what is our empathy map for developers? Here we have our programming ninja, which is all of us. And so when handed a project, we have a legitimate set of questions we ask. What am I supposed to accomplish? Where do I start? What are the interdependencies? How soon is this needed? And how critical is this? Those are all legit questions, and regardless of standards, that's what we ask. But if we don't have standards, then we start dealing with these others in a bigger way. So why is this so hard? Who wrote this travesty? What were they thinking when they wrote this? What am I missing? And how do I keep from screwing things up further? And then we're going downhill from there, and vainly tries to figure out what should be obvious but isn't. Paralyzed into inaction at times, depends on the developer's personality. Some people have that problem. And coupled with that is afraid to seek clarification. If I have to ask, then maybe they'll think I'm incompetent, kind of insecurities. And so finally, somebody seeks clarification, and that wastes both the time of the developer and the subject matter expert. And then that leads to making ineffective and wrong changes. And the bottom line to all of that is wasted time and effort. So what are we feeling while all this is going on? And overwhelmed, fearful, uncertain, anxious, frustrated, inadequate. And what happens when you have a human being feeling all those things? They tend to get pissed. So let's look at some more psychology behind standards. There's a UX usability heuristic stack, and standards leverage 5 elements of that. The first is consistency. The second is error prevention, back to anti-bugging again. Recognition rather than recall, efficiency, and helps us recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors better. So let's take these one at a time. Consistency is the foundational theme to this, everything we're talking about. If you lose consistency, the rest of this whole presentation is not worth the paper it's printed on if it was printed. There are no right or wrong standards, only better or worse. any standard is better than no standard. Pick a standard and then stick with it. You can evolve it over time, but you need to stick with it. Hit or miss doesn't get you in. It just muddies up the water even further. If you have a development staff, every developer should have to sign the standards, stating they will adhere to them. This is really important for onboarding new developers. And finally, standards need teeth. Without them, they're just advice, and we know advice. It's optional, and it's typically ignored. I know better than that. So let's look at error prevention. We've probably all seen the T-shirt or the meme just shown here. In complex apps, ripples are everywhere. And standards help us predict where they can occur so we can anticipate and handle them. I literally, in my previous employer, could change one FileMaker field name and break 5 websites if I wasn't careful. And so the standards help me prevent that kind of disaster. Recognition rather than recall. This is the major reason why Mac OS and Windows have supplanted CLIs like DOS and Unix for non-developers. And the reason is we don't have to remember a list of commands. And not only that, have to type them and then type them perfectly. And since I two-finger type and badly, that's not an optimal solution. So the bottom line is we don't have to retain so much in our brains, and this is the premise behind FileMaker's scripting tool. So let's look at efficiency. Time is money, especially in software consulting. We're not selling stuff. We're selling our creativity and expertise by the hour. And how our clients view us depends on how reliably we deliver on our promises, our quality, our time frame, everything. And if we can fix a bug or add an enhancement quickly without causing more problems, we can more easily sell the client on new work. So error recognition, diagnosis, and recovery. Quality is money too. Bugs undermine our clients' confidence in us. Undermine confidence equals less willingness to trust us with new work. And that means less money in our pockets. So let's look at general principles for naming before we get into actual naming. And that is, we tend to think of in terms of alphabetical or numerical order. And we've been conditioned to that from childhood. We also tend to categorize and group similar things together. That's a human nature kind of tendency. Naming should leverage both concepts. And as I said earlier, the primary goal of naming standards is to turn our haystacks into pincushions when it's time to find our needle. So let's look at table naming standards. Doesn't matter what case we use, it's completely irrelevant. The issue is, as I said earlier, consistency. Pick one and then stick with it, use it everywhere. External data sources. I think that names for ODBC tables should be identifiable at a glance. And the way I do that is a ZZ prefix. So they always sort to the bottom of the list. If you have external data sources, multiples, then you can do ZX, ZY, ZZ, and so on, however many you need to also force them to the bottom of the list. That way, there's no cluttering of your tables as to which your tables list of which is external, which is internal to FileMaker. So let's look at field naming standards, and we're going to take this in two passes because there's two aspects to it. The first is prefixes. And prefixes cause the fields list, when it's sorted alphabetically, to group similar items together, and allows us to visually prioritize and type them. I personally like using 2 leading underscores for primary key fields. I use _FK_ for foreign key fields, and CFK for calculated foreign key fields. And then _constant X for constants. And the reason I force them to the top of the list like that is because it helps clean up the connector lines on the relationship graph. And the constant, the X, stands for whatever value is in the constant field. And then this is going to be kind of controversial, and we'll circle back to this in a few minutes. @ for data fields. And then _A_ for audit trail fields, whether it's created by, updated by, whatever, any kind of audit trail field that you feel you need to do, it would be an A_. Then B_, which could also be a CB_, is a calculated Boolean field. So I have a field that is going to return a true or a false. It's going to have a B_ in front of it. CN for calculated non-Boolean numeric fields. CT for text fields. CD for date fields. And CL for list fields. And CG for container fields. You could use CC for container fields, but typically most containers are containing graphics. So I use CG. I never used a container field that contained anything other than graphics, so that's why I use that. And then we have a couple that are industry standards pretty much already, and that's G_ for globals, S_ for summary fields. And then finally, this is one that one I came up with. These are UI fields, and what I mean by a UI field is if you have a button or a popover button that has a variable title or icon in that depends on a certain state or a certain set of conditions to relabel that button, then I put UI at the beginning of it. What that does is it forces it to the very bottom of the fields list so that it's not cluttering up all my other calculated fields. So this is a list of fields sorted using the standards I just expounded. And you can see how they all group together, and it follows. It's just real logical. So I said we're going to circle back to the add-on %, so let's do that. I needed an ASCII character meeting the following 3 criteria. It sorts after an underscore, because underscores, we've already discussed what those go for. And then it needed to sort before a lowercase a, and it is allowed by FileMaker in a field name. And there's only 4 characters that meet that criteria: the @, exclamation point, question mark, and the %. So let's explore what's the issues with those latter 3. Question mark is typically used as a final character for FileMaker Boolean field names, excuse me. So I didn't like that one at all. In JavaScript and PHP, exclamation points are the logical not operator, and %signs are the modulo operator. So I just felt like @ was the best solution of the 4. So what about using underscores? Well, double leading underscores are already in use. Single leading underscores are already in use. So putting a single leading underscore for data fields was cause all field names beginning with A through E to sort ahead of the foreign keys. That will be bad. So, and using a combination of multiples leads to potential for typing errors, because how many underscores is that? Did I hit my key 3 times, meaning 2? Did I hit it 2 times, meaning 3, and all that? So it doesn't anti-bug is the issue here. Where are @ signs used? And the only thing I've been able to find is email addresses, and we're so familiar with that pattern that I don't think there's any risk of confusion. So let's look at some possibilities for incompatibilities. The first is with PHP. This can be handled through an associative array. An associative array consists of key value pairs, and the key is the cell address, which is on the left. And then we have the equals greater than sign with the FileMaker field name on the right. And so the beauty of this is that when you're using that array in your PHP code and you want to change the file or the field name in FileMaker, the only place you have to change it is one place, and that is in that single array. And then everything else ripples, it just automatically adapts and doesn't have any problems. So what do you do in JavaScript? Well, JavaScript doesn't do associative arrays. So we use JSON, and it's done exactly the same way. And so the notation's different, but it gets the same job done. So now we're going to do with the second half of field naming standards. And this is using the initial word or words in the file or the field name to indicate what kind of info is in the field. And this forces items to group together in a sorted by name fields list. Again, we're creating pincushions instead of haystacks. So name information. It all begins with the word name at the beginning of it. Address information, same thing. Phone information. You could do the same with emails and so on, and social media. And so each of these forces them to sort together. Otherwise, you've got a haystack. And if you only had these few fields in a table, it wouldn't be any big deal. But if you got dozens of fields, then you've got a huge haystack, and that's an issue. And here is a list of fields, sorted on the right without the leading word, and on the left with the leading word. And as you can see on the right, we have address information, 3 items there, and then we're going to switch to social media, and then we have 2 name issues, fields, and then we have a phone field, and then we're back to names again, and then back to social media, and then address, and then back to names, and we're hopscotching all over the place. Whereas in the left-hand list, address sorts all the address stuff together. The names, we have pincushions of address information, name information, so on and so forth. So let's look at formulas and custom functions. The Option tab on a Macintosh or the Alt tab on Windows are your best friend when you're editing calculated fields. And you use that to indent your formulas and your statements so that they pretty print. And it is remarkable how many, or how few, I should say, FileMaker developers who have been at it for 20+ years don't know that keystroke. So this is a typically written, formula in a calculated field. This is one that Remember I talked about UI calculations. This is one such. So I'm going to boldface the person ID, and then I'm going to concatenate it with a pilcrow to force the next onto the next line. And then I'm going to boldface again the full name of the person, and then pilcrow again, and then I'm going to put in the person's primary language. But isn't this ever so much more readable? And just one other tip about this, if you put your operators as the leading element on each line instead of at the end, if you have formulas that or statements that run off the right end of the window that you have to scroll sideways to see, if you put them on the left, then you can ensure you haven't left them off. And when you save it, and FileMaker is going, syntax error, then you can easily find where you left off the operator, and actually, in many cases, prevent where you leaving off the operator. So custom functions, same thing. I standardize my custom functions by using FN underscore as the prefix for all the names. That way, when I look at a formula in a calculated field or a variable, the FN immediately tells me, oh, that's a custom function. And if that custom function is part of the equation, that could be where the bug is possibly. So it alerts me to those kind of things. I personally use a leading tilde on all my variable names, but that's up to you all. And I always include commented out test data and results so that I can test them in the data viewer before putting into production. And now on to the biggest mare's nest, typically, and that is relationship graphs. Maintaining a FileMaker app with a badly organized RG costs hours of time and effort. Tragically, they're the norm, not the exception. And I will be the first to admit that FileMaker's layout tools for RGs are primitive. There's no snap to grid, there's no grouping, there's no position locking, there's not even subtractive drag selection. But there is no excuse for not leveraging what is there. And what we have are sizing and alignment and distribution tools, color coding, and notes. In summary, this is not the way. This is the way.
Oh, the first one was more fun.
I know what fun is, and that's not in the same universe. So what are the keys to a good RG? Consistently organize your parent, child, and anchor buoy relationships. Use a naming convention for table instances. Color code your instances. Use notes to denote subsystems and document oddities, and color code them too. And leverage FileMaker's alignment and spacing tools. So let's look at table relationships. Well, we think in terms of our parent languages, and in Western civilization, that flow is left to right. So unless there's an inescapable reason to do otherwise, all child instances should be to the right of their parents, or in anchor buoy situations, all buoy instances should be to the right of their anchors. As far as instance naming, there's three basic options. The first is no standard, which is typically how it's done. TLAs, which are 3-letter acronyms, and FLABs, which are 4-letter abbreviations. So what are the upsides and downsides of each? Well, for no standard, the upside is it's a no-brainer. It's easy peasy. You know, we just name it, we move on. The downside is that FileMaker sorts table instances in its pop-up menus alphabetically. So if you have dozens of table instances in that list, you've got a huge haystack you've got to sort through instead of pincushions again. And it's time consuming to find one instance out of a huge list like that. So here's examples of standard, no standard. And, you know, That's okay. But I'll guarantee you they sort all over the map in every pop-up menu that FileMaker is going to provide you. So let's look at TLAs. Basically, a TLA is 3 uppercase letters followed by a single underscore. And the upside is it forces FileMaker to sort things by your TLA first and then by the names that follow. And it also allows instant identification of the table relationship and subsystem involved. The downside is there's only a little over 17,500 permutations, but that's not really achievable because you can't just randomly create a TLA like XYZ and have it mean anything. You're limited to stuff that actually means something.
Hey, Doc.
So, yeah.
The question was raised, what's a TLA? What does a TLA mean?
Three-letter acronym.
3-letter acronym, all right.
So here we have TLAs and examples. We have CUS customers and so on. And so by seeing the chain of TLAs together in this bottom one, I can see that this is a 3rd level relationship or a 3rd level or 2nd level buoy, I should say, of the customer buoy with the or customer anchor with the invoice buoy followed by the order buoy or parent child, whatever you want to call it. So let's deal with FLABs. To remind you, a FLAB is a 4-letter acronym. And you have a choice here. You can either use 3 uppercase letter or 4 uppercase letters or 3 with a number, also followed with an underscore. The upside is it accrues all the benefits of TLAs and increases your possibilities to over 600,000, a much more usable subset within that set, within that number of permutations. And 4 is still not becoming cumbersome. And the downside, I haven't discovered one yet. So let's look at FLABs. Same things we looked at before, but we see the relationships all set. So here's some examples of standardizing. Customers means, CUST always means customers, no matter what app you're in, no matter what client you're in. Order is always an order. INVO is always an invoice. ADDR is always an address, and so on. And you standardize across apps, across clients, and no matter which app you're picking up for which client, you always know what you're looking at. So here is a literally real-life example of FileMaker sorting according to FLAB. On the left hand, this is actually one list that I had to split in half so that I could keep it at a reasonable magnification on the slide. So the first half, we're dealing with enrollment-related stuff. So we have a person anchor and an enrollment buoy of some flavor, depending on how the relationship is set up. Over on the right, we have a person buoy with a person anchor with a HIST buoy, and HIST is credit card history. Then we have ledgers, and then we have letters, which are system-generated letters to students. OAP is online applications. And then we actually have the persons table, the anchor. And then we have purchases. These are courses that have been purchased by students, and then scholarships, and so on and so forth. So again, we have pin cushions, not haystacks. Color coding. It's remarkable how few programmers leverage this. Yes, FileMaker's color coding standard or color coding colors are limited, but you can work around that, as awkward as it is. And I color code by entity or subsystem. So we're going to go back to our "this is the way" example. And blue is dealing with the person anchor, and that's the person anchor right there on the left of in the blue. And everything that pertains to it is to the right. In the dark gray area to the left, those are all miscellaneous tables that have to do with just various kinds of things. The light gray up above that are tables that produce value lists. The light violet one is the globals. The bottom olive green one is courses, and the yellow is degrees awarded, and the purple are courses, and so on. So let's look at these in a little closer magnification. We have the person anchor on the left, and then we have miscellaneous items like tree and doctoral dissertations and theses on the right, and then we have other persons that are associated with that person.
Scott?
Yeah.
We had a blur, so just for clarity, you were right on the persons and then working your way to the right.
Yes.
So if you just want to go back just about 30 seconds.
Okay. On the left here, we have the person anchor or parent. And then on the right, we have its children and grandchildren or buoys, whatever. When we look at this list, we say, oh, green, those are enrollments. I look at yellow, oh, those are degrees awarded. I look at purple, oh, those are courses at a glance. Orange, oh, those are campuses.
I have a quick question if I can.
Yeah.
It's Mike Wallace. One thing that I do that I was wondering if you considered the after your 4-letter abbreviation, if you put in a double underscore instead of a single underscore, then everything will sort so that it was if you go back to your other slide, you'll see that your, like, for example, persons sorts into the middle of your other tables below it. Whereas if you put the double underscore after PERS before persons, it will always sort above any child tables. And the same thing is true for the third.
That's a really good suggestion. Thank you. I like that. Anything that creates pin cushions out of haystacks, I'm all for. So now we'll look at campuses. Campuses are orange. The persons associated with campuses are in blue, and so on. Classes are that lighter green. So classes are an instance of a course being taught in a certain time frame at a specific campus to a specific set of students. And then academic calendars. This is where the campuses predict when what course they're going to be teaching, in what order, and who's going to be teaching it. And this is a legal document that the main campus uses to ensure that the extension campuses adhere to the agreements and only have certified teachers and so on and so forth. So again, we see on the right, we see purple for courses that are assigned to a specific cell. We have faculty, and then up at the top, we have how those calendars are related to classes, because those classes have to correlate. So flabs and script names. Now, this is where I use the double underscore. So you can do the same thing with scripts. You look at a list of scripts and blammo, there you are. You know the relationships that are being dealt with. Here are flabs and script names, and I want to disclaim this. These are unique flabs, and I'll explain how the system behind that later. Those are actually unique flabs that I have a custom function that parses that unique flab off of the script name And then I can change the name of the script anything I want after the double underscores, and nothing breaks, because I'm always calling that custom function instead of the script directly. Flabs and layout names, same concept. Or using the example we just talked about, doing the same thing with layouts that I did in scripts. So here is a list of layouts using a unique layout, a unique flab for each layout. And there's a method to that madness. And this is the table that I used to use. And we have a subset down here of PUF 1, 2, and 3. So a PUF 1, 2, and 3 have to do with what? A person on the first character, and it's a UI issue on the bottom, the second character, and it's find related in the third character, and then the number uniquely identifies its class. So the big, huge question that most people ask that are approaching standards for the first time is, holy crap, I have got this huge body of code and that's just too big of a nut to crack. Fortunately, FileMaker takes care of a lot of this automagically. You go in and change table names, and unless that name is calculated somewhere in a script or in a field or a file, then it automatically updates. The renames ripple everywhere. Same thing with script names, same thing with field names. Everything ripples out, and it warns you, oh, do you want to change this? Because this affects this calculation, and that kind of thing. There's two notable exceptions, and we'll deal with them. The first exception is when a field, a custom function, a script step, whatever, calculates a name rather than referencing it specifically. So go to object by name, go to layout by name, go to portal row by name, perform script by name, whatever. Anything that uses a name calculation in it. The problem with these, unless you're using a custom function like I just described to you, this is really bad practice because it makes your code brittle, and you make minor changes and all of a sudden, holy crap, all this other stuff broke. And in such cases, the best case is replacing the calculated name with the absolute reference, and then FileMaker will maintain it for you forever after. But if you can't, you've got to go through each and every name calculation and edit it to conform to the new standard. Another exception is when you have an external data source and it's hard coded with its field and table names, and you have three alternatives. If it's a FileMaker, whatever, you can apply your standards to the external data source as well, possibly, if you have control over that external data source. If you don't, then you're left with possibly creating a translation table in the RG. And basically, a translation table is a table that stands between the external data source and the internal table and directly translates one to the other with calculated fields. And the calculated field on the right, or in the formula, looks at the external data source table and file name or field name. And then the left side is what your FileMaker code internally references. It's the same concept as the associative arrays in JSON that we talked about earlier. The worst is you just got to leave them out of your standards and cope with it. If you're dealing with 2 or 3, you need to clearly document your RG with a note to alert yourself or whoever else later that those items exist and why. So how do we reduce our pain? Again, most people look at the elephant of retrofitting standards, especially across multiple apps, and feel completely overwhelmed. And also, how am I going to justify financially the time is money, remember, how am I going to justify the time required to retrofit those standards? And on top of that, if I bill it to the customer, it's not really fair to the customer. The customer pays us to build stuff and fix stuff, not enforce our own way of doing things on stuff after we've already written it. So one way that we do, and one I recommend, is take it a bite at a time, just like eating any other elephant. Take the low-hanging fruit, pardon the mixed metaphor, where you can leverage FileMaker to do stuff for you, and then address one system at a time, subsystem at a time. So if I'm dealing with the person anchor, then I'm going to deal with the person anchor and all the buoys, and I'm going to make that standards compliant. And then once I'm done with that, I'm going to call it a day, and then leave the rest for later. And that is something that you could conceivably bill the customer for, because that's not going to be this huge block of time of hours and hours and hours where you're having to do that retrofit. And then when you go back in and address something else, apply the standards to that new something. And so you just take it a chunk at a time. So final thoughts. Implementing standards indeed requires extra time, and especially when retrofitting them, because you have to look for all the possible ripple effects and compensate for those and cope with them. The bottom line is you will expend extra time concerning standards. You cannot escape it. So whether you have them or not, it's pay me now or pay me later. It's my position that the cost in time and effort of later far outweighs the cost of now. And it's easier to do it on the front side than it is on the back side. So in closing, pick a standard, write it out, make it a company policy, enforce it, and reap the benefits. So now we will have our Q&A session.
I have a couple of comments. One, I think that what you said about it not being billable to the customer, I think that that's absolutely, not true, because anything you do that makes the database more supportable for the future is investing into the software. Even if they don't see it on the front end, that's just how you have to be able to explain that and sell that.
I agree.
Because like you said, it's pay me now, pay me later. And so we can either go through and clean up, and a lot of times you just say, you know what, we've been putting out a fire mode, for quite a while now, and now we need to double back and do some cleanup and standardization so that this is, solid going forward. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that happens in phases where, right now they're in a lot of development and they have to do a lot right now. And when you can take a breath, you say, okay, now it's time to double back and do cleanup so that we don't have problems in the future. The other thing I would recommend is, I'm not sure if people pay attention to them, but the functions like script IDs and script names, for example, I'm not sure if you're aware, but those both return the same list in the same order. So in other words, there's custom functions out there already to do this, but you can very easily write your own custom function to, translate back and forth from a script ID to a script name, so that you're never calling a script by a hard-coded name. You call it by that ID, and that ID will always, whatever, even if you rearrange your scripts, that fifth item, which is this ID, will always be the 5th item in the other list, which is the name. So,
Okay.
so you can, that's the same for all of the different pieces that are, you know, there's an ID versus name function for anything like that. So that's what is I use, because I refuse to hard code any kind of name like that, because I've been bitten way too many times. So
Yeah.
just some feedback. So that.
And one other thing that I had not mentioned is sometimes we inherit somebody else's body of code.
Right.
And so if I take on a new client and they already have a pre-existing FileMaker solution, I'm at the mercy of whatever good or bad practice was employed on that solution. And part of our quote for assuming support of that and moving forward should be time for enforcing, you know, applying standards to it, so that exactly as you said, we're circling back and making sure that this thing is maintainable moving forward.
Right, and not only that, but that same time is double billable. Not double billable, but it's double productive, because you are also getting to know the system while you're intimately while you're resetting.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Doc, I have a few comments to make.
Okay.
I made notes though, so I won't ramble. The first is, one thing you left out on the potential issues with renaming is, and this is something that we've been bitten by, so I'm very familiar with it, and that's execute SQL statements. So execute SQL statements that have within them hard-coded the field name, for example, are real problems. So we have a custom function for that. You know, we use a custom function, or we use get field name or something like that within when we write the execute SQL statement in the first place. But another place, sometimes we'll write code where that code exists as data, right? And our scripts are going to pull the data formula from a data field, and that's not in your schema. And that you have to be really careful about that. So execute SQL is something, if you've got that and you use it in your system, you need to be wary of renaming. Another thing I have here is the examples you gave did use kind of an anchor buoy system, and we work with a lot of systems that are more spider-like, if you will. So you're, you know, having the flab at the beginning based on the anchor is kind of the opposite of how we might normally look at this. And so my comment is that the format and the type of standard you're talking about works also in reverse. And like you said at the beginning,
absolutely,
whatever your standard is, stick with it, right? So if you're doing it the way you showed us with an anchor buoy or the reverse, either way, whatever it is, just stick with it across the board. But one thing that I do that you didn't include in your graph is within each fork of the graph, whether it's anchor buoy or otherwise, I alphabetize the table occurrences. Their position is in alphabetical order, because when you've got a list of 20 children, I don't want to be hunting for the one that's spelled a certain way. I want to be able to get to it real quickly, which I can do if they're alphabetized. And it really just takes like 5 extra seconds to do that. And so I would like to see more developers do that.
I really like that idea. And I haven't thought of that, but that's a great suggestion, Heather.
Work, if you can alphabetize it, will make your job and everybody else's so much better later on. And then there was one comment you made that I disagree with. And so I want to call that out. And that is where you said, doing things like perform script by name, go to object by name, go to layout name, you said it was bad practice. And I would argue that it depends on how you use it, because I use it, for example, just to go to simple go to layout example, where the calculation, it is calculated, but it's calculated based on the context where you are right now. So for example, I may move from my current layout to my current layout name plus the word list view, right? Or something like that, where the context of where I am is going to determine the result of where it's going, or the context of where I am is going to determine which script is going to run. But it's not based on a name that changes, it's based on context or functionality.
And you know, I totally get that. And that custom function that I showed you earlier in passing, and I can go back to it if you want to see it, but basically that calculates GPA at the university I used to work for. And there's various levels. Of course, you have undergraduate, masters, and doctorates, and so on. And so the enrollments that are classed according to that study level are one set of relationships. And then there's an aspect of what kind of enrollment. Is it coursework? Is it transfer credits? And so on and so forth. And so all those were calculated in the custom function and then assembled into a relationship that a relationship graph occurrence that was then addressed. So I totally get what you're talking about, and you are right. I wouldn't argue that.
I think what that comes down to is keep the rules until you know enough to know when to break the rules.
Yeah, and document where you break the rules so that some poor sap after you or yourself comes back and says, "What in the hell?"
Right.
Got anything else, Heather?
No, I think that's it. No, there's one more thing. Sorry. It's never just one more thing.
I know.
You said something earlier that I wanted to call out because I think it went by it too quickly, and I think it's really important, and not enough developers do this, and that is to put a comment on the field. And one of the things we don't know that we can't tell is, when did something happen? When did this field get added? I mean, we can sort them by creation order and know that it was created before that field or after this field, but that doesn't really tell us when it was added, why it was added, who added it, you know, or anything like that. So it's a practice that I've only been following for a couple of years myself, but when you add a new field to a table, add a comment that has the date and your initials, and if there's a ticket associated with it, the ticket, so that someone can track down why was this added and what's, you know, if you want to say something about its purpose. If I have a field that's a calculation that's complicated, like it's got status levels and there's 5 of them, I'll actually put in the comment, you know, 1 equals new, 2 equals this, 3 equals such and such, just so that the developer doesn't have to dig into the code to see the answer. They can just flip over their list of fields and they can see those descriptions and information right there. And I found that real helpful. And then the other thing that we can't document is we can't add a note to a table. Like, so when did we add this table to the system? And so I use the unique ID field, which for us is the _CID. And I add a comment to that ID field that says when the table was added. So I think using the comments in your fields can be real helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And that's a great suggestion. I should have incorporated it in my presentation and will for future.
And that's it. That's all I got.
You're sure?
Positive.
Yeah, that's what's up. Yeah.
I have a question as a non-developer.
Go for it.
How do you enforce this? You talked about enforcing code compliance.
Well, if you have
Don't pay people if they don't do it.
You slap their
well,
hand.
that is the bottom line. But when you institutionalize standards as corporate policy, one, there needs to be a legal document the developer signs saying, I will adhere to the standards. That means they are legally bound by, just like NDAs or non-competes or whatever, standards standards documents are pretty standard throughout the, pardon the repeat, but they're pretty standardized throughout the programming industry. The As far as how do you enforce them? Well, if the company has standardized, regularized performance reviews, whether they be annual, quarterly, monthly, semi-annually, whatever interval you want to use, one of the criteria on that performance review should be this person does, doesn't, always, sometimes, whatever, however you want to measure it, adhere to the corporate programming standards. And that becomes the basis for their compensation and whether they get a raise. But one, I mean, it's not the only thing. You want to have things like, of course, attendance and punctuality and all those other measures, and job ethic and work ethic, I mean, and that kind of stuff. But actually, adherence to standards is actually a direct method of measuring part of work ethic. So
you'll end up butting heads with other, if you're collaborating and work with multiple developers on the same project and you're not doing the standards right, I promise you the other developers are going to butt heads with you real quick.
Yeah.
oh yeah, there will be strife and there might be blood. So the issue here is there needs to be teeth, and the teeth is usually through the performance evaluations and compensation. And if in really tremendously egregious situations, performance improvement plans, and failing that, termination.
I think we should make the people who messed up the grass clean them.
The problem is the, yeah,
Mess up your bedroom, clean it up.
yeah, there's merit to that, but the problem is it's reminds me of this marquee outside a church that one of the staff members put up the marquee, and it said, "The pastor told me to change the sign, so I did." So, passive aggression is legendary in programming. Yeah, that's a two-edged sword. I don't know. I'd want to try to crack that nut.
Okay.
Anything else?
I think we're kind of reaching the end of time here, and Steve, or shall I call you Doc? We appreciate the time here. It's been a good presentation, and obviously there's lots to discuss on programming standards, and everybody has their own standards. Of course, mine are the best, and every developer seems to have that opinion, but it's all good. We appreciate you bringing the topic up, and know it's a good topic to consider upping the ante on making things that are basically reusable by other developers down the road, making that a very important feature of a well-created solution for our customers. So appreciate you taking the time to be here. Next month, we're going to learn a little bit about Swift in FileMaker. Brian Ham will be our presenter. So if you join us in January and you have an interest to learn and getting into deep, I thought getting deep was getting into JavaScript, but we up the ante here. Brian's going to tell us about.
Oh, we're dealing with whole orders of magnitude when we deal with Swift.
So anyway, that'll be kind of interesting. I'm kind of looking forward to it. So Brian's out here in the audience here. He's smiling in the back. But anyway, we look forward to having him. But I hope all of you guys have happy holidays, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, all the good things out there, and that we'll catch you guys all next month. Take care, everybody.
Thanks for having me.